Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this in-depth talk with Rok Kranjc and on how to set up playgrounds for post-capitalist imagination. And to just super quickly introduce Rok Kranjc, I'm super sorry, is an independent researcher, writer, translator, event organizer, and founder of FuturesCraft, a design studio for experiential futures, generative games, and other forms of engagement with alternative economies. He works internationally through Peer-to-Peer Foundation and Participatory Futures Global Swarm. He has translated several books on political ecology and ecological economics into Slovenian. He is currently leading a series of events in European cities with his performance game Game Changers, the game. Lots of times the word game in there. And is writing a book with Dr. Peter Bloom on regenerative and commons-based economics. Okay, I would say this is, yes, we have Rok's link tree where you can find all of his work, one-stop shop kind of style in the chat. And I'll hand it over to you, Rok.
Yeah, thanks so much. For inviting me and also for everyone who's showing up today. Yeah, hopefully the premise, was exciting enough for you. And yeah, besides me just presenting, I suppose from a kind of perspective of, a kind of researcher, but also let's say artist and cultural worker. And trying to make ends meet within capitalism while also working on various post-capitalist projects. And I'm really interested in kind of the potentials of performativity, utopias, but also like critical visions of not just possible futures, but maybe possible parallel presents or various other things. Futures are overrated these days, I think. But um, how we can effectively use these things to intervene in discourse, make or render alternatives more tangible in a way. It's maybe a kind of key point between theory and practice, where you get to kind of skip some steps of the evolution of these things in like general struggle. And how can we actually use and create like imagination infrastructures, like through games, experiential scenarios of possible futures, and things like that to create, counter pressure on capitalist realism essentially, and open up these cracks into alternative worlds that can kind of iteratively self-actualize in some way. But yeah, we'll try to unpack this, I guess, through first a little bit of a overview, let's say conceptual, methodological overview of the field that we will be kind of tackling, and then move on to some, let's say examples, followed by, kind of tour through some of the things that I've created that try to, be in conversation with these themes and tools. I'll share my screen. So this is a card from the Game Changers game that we heard about earlier. But one of the cruxes of the problem is certainly this, right? We seem to be bombarded by these used futures, not just dystopias, but also like these visions of circular economies and smart cities and what have yous, kind of completely devoid of any radical content, but rather trying to reproduce again and again the status quo. And how do we intervene in this kind of the big question here? And one of the interesting answers, I think, is found in this premise of, well, one could call it economic science fictions, covered very nicely in this publication, whose again premise is kind of that capitalism that we live in is also a kind of collectively constructed fiction, right? And we all sort of know that money, in essence, is a fiction. But then, how can we use fiction to counter that? Create openings into alternatives. There's various initiatives around the world that are taking up this challenge and doing various interesting projects. One of these is Edge Riders, leading the so-called Sci-Fi Economics Lab, which we also have to be careful sometimes, maybe just a footnote in referencing all sorts of projects and kind of putting in all your hopes and dreams. The less context, in which they're created, deployed, and so on, can skew kind of our interpretation of what are the potentiality there. Sometimes we try to make something small, something very big or significant, sometimes the other way around. And we also need to acknowledge that many initiatives don't have the means, etc., to share their designs or document their findings online for everyone to see. But indeed, this is one interesting example just to get us started. And another that I found kind of fascinating comes from the backstory of the Open Co-op, which is an interesting kind of conglomerate of artists, hackers, researchers, focusing around the peer-to-peer economy, platform cooperativism. And actually, the genesis of this now, let's say, institution kind of comes from this prototyping exercise for the kind of user interface for how we could kind of be, each and every one of us in a distributed manner, be in the wheels, have our hands on the wheels of our economy and our daily lives and work and such. And mind you, this is all pre-Facebook, pre-Google Maps, and things like that. But it just goes to show that with, some imagining and prototyping, on the one hand, this can materialize in this case, a cooperative. But also we can prefigure, right, some ideas of how we could do, let's say, economic planning. So just to continue this bombardment of concepts and methods, this is again one that I found really interesting, and I came across during my bachelor studies in sociology, where I got really interested in critical images of the future and what sociology has had to say in the past, and contemporary theory at the time. This was about 10 or 8 years ago. What is the role of sociology and related fields kind of pursuing this utopian impulse in a way that's constructive of actual, kind of positive projects. This is another related example, which talks about visionary fiction as another approach, combining, narrative storytelling, science fiction with struggles from social justice movements, visions of alternative futures. Which also leads to examples like this one, Multi-Species Cities, Solarpunk Urban Futures, a collection of short stories about what the experience of cities could be, like critical, but also some positive visions of human, non-human, cohabitation or urban interdependence. But what I really want to focus on here is not science fiction or narrative storytelling per se, but more this turn towards, experiential design or even co-design, kind of questioning questioning this practice of single author vision of futures, but rather kind of offering methods, toolkits for anyone to kind of engage in constructing, questioning, and even prototyping and kind of experimentally embodying alternative possibilities. So like this, by Stuart Candy, this particular writing and this kind of somewhat famous representation of what the practice is about also follows, one might even call a kind of elite design school, and a lot of experiential futures stuff all follows kind of the same aesthetic and so on. In best cases, that like from my or our perspective, given the subject matter here, it tackles sometimes these, alternative economies, these topics, but these examples are kind of very sporadic. We will go through some of these in just a bit. And the other turn that I'm interested in is this approach to gaming and generative gaming, which we will also explore later. This is another example of some methodologies called prehearsals and pre-enactments. This is by the FOAM, International Collective of Artists, Researchers. And I found very interesting to kind of help put radical ideas about alternatives to the human scale in kind of iterative, reflexive experimentation, kind of engaging with alternative subjectivities, kind of melding your present self with alternative parallel or future selves. We talked about gaming. In this case, they look into how future studies and foresight practice intersects with practices like theater of the oppressed. So I'm very much interested. We'll look at some examples of board games, narrative storytelling games, but also scenario simulations, performances, LARPs. The kind of final point that I want to prelude this overview is this notion of how can we scale, in a way, these efforts, right? We have these various sporadic instances of, let's say, radical games and scenarios, even some digital artifacts, like digital games you can find on Steam these days and so forth. But I think we can do better. This is a provisional we, of course, but the idea is how can we not just mutualize the knowledge and resources that go into building alternative futures and the methods with which we build those futures. So kind of a translocal sharing, not just of designs for these games and experiences or speculative artifacts and what have you that you can use to incite different kinds of public interventions, let's say. How do you create kind of mesh, a network that brings together images of possible futures, but also all the potentials that come from a collaboratively curated repository of knowledge that can keep expanding. So this Open Futures Library would be one example, prefigurative example of what this could be like, which the website doesn't work anywhere and was launched as part of like a governmental project in Australia, but the concept is still there and it's there for the taking. So just it's a quick overview. There's a whole bunch of various interesting design studios, initiatives, semi-institutions that uh, deal with these kinds of approaches. But I'll let you to just take a screen grab, or we could discuss some of these later on if you like. So as I finished my master's in 2017, which was in something called environmental governance, what I was focusing on then, and I still am very much, is how do you, because what I was recognizing a lot is precisely these discursive battles and battles of different alternatives of basic income, circular economy, regenerative economy, like all these buzzwords that are kind of operationalized and sometimes weaponized against change itself. And how can we use games and like tools to effectively counter or like render visible these kinds of dynamics, enable us to actually play with them, and by playing with them actually somehow influencing the real world. Just one semi-banal example, if one would be able to popularize game-like conversations and storytelling about possible futures at scale, which we see in social media and contemporary internet culture. Just think of, say, the SCP Foundation is one of the more known examples of collaborative fiction projects that kind of sets up a basic framework and then lets anyone contribute to an ever-expanding world of references and fictions. So how can we sort of tap into those kind of things for these purposes? So at the time I was looking at the Open Futures Library, but also various like global maps of what researchers like to call social or ecological innovations, socio-technical innovations, this kind of stuff, and thinking through how these things might be combined to form some kind of like anticipatory knowledge commoning engine run on games and a participatorily curated kind of platform. These were the kind of questions that arose from that line of inquiry. Questions of power, right? Who has the capacity to shape futures, use these tools, very much, let's say, connected to this notion of futures literacy, alternatives literacy, if you will, how to get there. And yes, we start with some examples. I'm happy that Kier is also here with us today. Hey, Kier. This is, by Red Plenty Games, very interesting game called the Social Strike Game, which I also had the pleasure of trying in London a few years back. Similarly to my own design, which we'll get in a bit later, it kind of uses prompts, in this case also like more strongly game masters, for a group or ideally several teams to create stories, kind of react to various scenarios, adjust strategies, and kind of do this collective storytelling. What's interesting about it is kind of based on local contexts in the UK, but very much appreciate this kind of invitation to for people to appropriate and modify the game, perhaps even to suit their own kind of local contexts, issues. And this kind of notion we will explore later with what I'm calling, or what some have referred to as game commons. There's another neat example, but as one can see very much in this kind of contemporary design aesthetic, at least in presentation, is this LARP, which kind of invited people to embody participants in a non-existent conference of futurologists, and it was complete with capes, personalized name cards, conference schedules, hotel vouchers for non-existent hotel, I presume, and some wacky drinks, kind of creating an experience of a conference, while, to my understanding, the world outside is kind of in turmoil. There's a kind of interaction between the inside, the conference, and the outside. But that may also be another project I have in mind. Apologies if it's wrong information. And to go to another, like, multi-species flavored one, rather famous, I suppose, in these art and design experiential future circles, the Treaty of Finsbury Park. This is the platform for it, but essentially it serves as a kind of meeting space for people to discuss, but also engage in LARP-like activities representing interests of various non-human species that intersect at Finsbury Park. Another example of a perhaps grassroots endeavor, the queer embassy of possible futures. And just as a footnote, again, you might ask how I find these things. And the answer would be is I make it a point to periodically kind of use various search terms, Google and other search platforms, to essentially, with a bit of like adjustment in when things are published and so on, like try to find and then list and map various practices that pop up and might be part of or inform this broader ecosystem of this practice. But this one I found like that. It seems to be a kind of community space for a queer and feminist community to come together and also employ LARP-like practices in a kind of laboratory of ideas. Just to show, like, this is kind of a personal mapping. It's a partial mapping, but I can just scroll through some of them. I'll scroll through this. You can also go back to the video for reference if anything really sticks out. This one is interesting. For example, it's a card game used to generate essentially speculative professions. This one, I think this one got super it got really popular, especially in France, reached like 1 million or more users. It's based on science by the IPCC and such. It might be kind of in the outer rim of the kind of crux that we're dealing with here, but it's kind of interesting in that just by employing a simple ambassador program, they were able to scale and bring this kind of tool into the hands of millions. This one I have an affinity for. It's one of the rare analog games that deals with these contested discourses around alternative economies, governance models, and mesh of science and technology, new technologies. Even, yeah, Mushroom at the End of the World, Anat Singh. There's this reference 20 years ago. If you find this book, you can find within it uh, yeah, a little game and storytelling cards.
Super quickly, Rock, someone is asking if you could post the link of this document into the chat, or if it's like in the link tree, a link to this document.
Yeah, it's um, definitely not this link, as it's kind of a paper that I'm writing that's in progress. But for one, I propose that if you want, you can look back at the video. It's all just descriptions taken from the links themselves. So you're welcome to check that out for yourselves. But I can also, if there's broader interest, just copy this somewhere, share the link. Yeah. So well, maybe yeah, there seems to be quite an abundance, and in some senses there is. I think there's quite a disconnect kind of between creators and also this kind of divide between designers and participants in these things. Divides that yeah we would address later. And here there's the chapter on role-playing games, LARPs. Yeah, this one is interesting. Was deployed in the Nordic LARP kind of context. Mike Pochiola was the organizer, I believe. And at first they were trying to simulate, participatory economics system by this Robert Hachnell and this other guy. This somewhat well-known alternative economics framework. But then they decided to more delve into the kind of transition space, like between now and possible futures, and how you can play that through LARP. There's a neat report from this process here. This is the one I was mentioning. I was at the second edition of just 2 weeks ago.
Super quickly, someone is asking if you can zoom like a tiny bit into the document. I think probably depending on the screen size. Okay, oh, perfect. That's already big, but it's perfect. Thank you.
Mm.
I didn't think about the screen size, sorry, but thanks.
Mm. So yeah, just going through a bunch of these. Some of these we discussed earlier. Yeah, there's also some mapping in terms of digital platforms, tools, apps, digital games. Most of you have probably heard of Heifer socialism. But yeah, there's not too many that I could find. Of course, really tried. We could generate more, but uh, I won't go into too much. But yeah, there's a bunch of interesting projects, initiatives. The Liberation Lab. So here I'll transition to talking more about my own practice, and I'll focus on 2.5 projects and some more like ideas that I have in terms of further development of them. So one was, as mentioned, this Game Changers, the game, which I've sort of been developing, or I initially developed the concept in 2018 for a degrowth conference in Malmo in Sweden. But it kind of took on a life of its own. I've continuously over the years kind of iterated on the design, tried it out with different communities and in different settings. It's only in the past couple of years that it's also reached a level or a concept which can be deployed, at art festivals, conferences, activist gatherings and things, also as a kind of event or performative event or a participatory event involving not just players, but audiences also in active roles. This was, let's say, the inaugural public event happened a few years ago in Ljubljana, in Slovenia, where I'm also from, by the way. And yeah, even the design you see here on the picture, like the design has been updated since then. But yeah, this was another event we did, Panke Gallery in Berlin last year. And similarly to the one in Ljubljana, I was trying out bringing together various practitioners or people known to be involved in various new economy projects and kind of put them in the hot seats as they have to kind of improvise short stories, which then the audience assesses, trying to create a kind of more horizontal structure of knowledge co-creation rather than kind of a top-down, we are the carriers of knowledge and you are the receptacles kind of thing.
Super quickly, Rok, can we maybe like wrap it up in around like 10 minutes so we still have like time for discussion? Just as a heads up.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll skip through, and I already mentioned some of the contexts in which it has been deployed, but this is kind of a digital clone version of it. There's a built-in randomizer, so I'll put in some buzzwords. So this is kind of the first layer of setting up the game. Either you find the players first or determine the theme and determine the themes, or vice versa, depends on the kind of project. But essentially we come up with several buzzwords that serve as anchors, and those will be kind of the core contested buzzwords that the two teams will essentially try to co-opt in their own ways through storytelling. So when the buzzwords are the first layer, the second layer, these again are randomized, so it may not be a perfect fit, but these are the effective playing fields that the two teams try to co-opt. So essentially they form part of the prompt for their storytelling. And right now I'm seated as a player on Team Capitalism. We have a few options here, who to channel, although this is more a gimmick than an actual feature of the game. But essentially I would get challenge cards as a capitalist. Again, these ones are randomized, but this is just one example. Its sustainability policy is dominated by a one-way future consisting only of growth. It's a paraphrasing of Ursula Le Guin's lecture. But essentially, you as a capitalist, together with your team, you would choose one of these cards and try to capture one of these fields. So if you want to tackle the DAO space, you have to kind of use the essence of this argument in a way to either do role playing or just lay out cold-blooded arguments. Actually, any kind of narrative strategy, as long as it gets the audience to vote favorably for you, which is kind of an intriguing part of the game where you have to kind of figure out what works. Should I really channel my inner Elon Musk for this move, or should I, use other strategies? And say we were successful as Team Capitalism in planting this challenge, the DAO space temporarily kind of belongs to us, but then players on Team Communism just move to this seat over here. Reset currents, deal interventions. Okay, so we had a challenge planted here, and Team Communism essentially has to respond with one of their interventions, kind of weaving the story of how this intervention in a specific context kind of created a pathway towards radical change. So basically, the mechanic would be the same. Like they would pitch a short story and they would have 2 minutes to do so. And then once they're done with their story or performance, mini performance, or their move, the audience members would vote from 0 to 6 how convinced they are by the story or the performance. So 6 being like a perfect score, a 0 being the lowest score one can give. And a lot of the stories kind of are between 3 and 4. But essentially that score is then mapped onto a dice roll. So if the team told a not convincing story and got a 2 out of 6 for their story, they roll the dice, and if they get 1 or a 2, they succeeded, but anything else, they failed. They overshot their kind of favor of the public. And here I rolled a 5, so it's an overshoot, and it could fail if we only got a score of 2. But if our story was really compelling, we got, say, 5 out of 6 on average from the audience. We rolled the dice. Again, we overshot, but we only had, we could roll 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 to succeed and a 6 to fail, but we were unlucky and got a 6 and failed. But this kind of mechanic loop, it doesn't just, it involves kind of player skill and narrative storytelling or convincing the audience. It's also a mix of like the proclivities of the audience in any given context, place and time. But it also includes an element of chance or luck. But this element also makes the design somewhat inclusive, as no one really gets a 0 score. Very few get a 6 score. So if you're really bad at telling stories, there's always a chance. And there's room for improvement as you learn which strategies work and not. So yeah, in this way, and played like publicly as a kind of game show or participatory theater, like my thesis is that we can kind of intervene in and influence public discourse on alternatives, kind of rendering this cooptation and Trojan horse dynamics visible. This is just one example of how the game is also open and modular and inviting people. This was before the event in Berlin to submit their own card ideas, which then the players have to play with. And in so doing, you kind of open up kind of this space for people to kind of, in a way, become co-designers. Um, but also like then the more the game is played, there's an ever expanding library of game materials that you can choose from, but also an ever expanding library of recordings and narratives that were generated. And a lot of times they are quite entertaining and fun, but also critical, kind of sometimes really hit the nail on the, I forget the full expression. And here,
Can you
just
maybe
very
share
briefly,
super quickly? Can you
mhm.
maybe share the link for the open call in the chat, like what you just showed, the Google Doc?
Uh,
Maybe later on,
mm,
also totally fine.
sure, yeah. Especially also if we want to organize something down the line, an event or something, there can actually produce together in a distributed way our own edition of the game that kind of brings together all of our knowledges and insights and kind of plug them into this stimulated game environment. Yeah.
Okay, let's. Is it okay if I cut you off here right now because we have like 10 minutes to go, or like finish it in like 1 minute or something? Is that fine? Sorry,
Um,
like,
well, it's fine. I haven't gotten to the second project. It just I think depends on you how much you're really constrained on time and want to finish on the dot. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, like, can you maybe like because we really want to keep it to like around an hour, and then you can
Mhm.
if you have a link for the next project. I think I haven't communicated the time constraints super well in advance. I'm sorry for that. I just realized that. Um, yeah, but if you have a link and can post that, and then people can inquire if they're interested by themselves, that would be cool.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Sorry,
Maybe
it's
just
yeah,
a few
on me.
sentences to wrap up. I think um, I'm happy to then answer any questions and things. Um, so this is just a mock-up of a kind of user interface I'm toying with that would kind of enable us to actually create game editions together and share content created, yeah, create custom deck with friends, share, yeah, like snippets, videos, or recordings from sessions or stories being generated, and even, yeah, various metadata like tags or in how many designs a particular card was used and various like yeah some more gimmicky things, but overall the idea is how can we mutualize game design, radical game design, relating also to this concept that's already 20 years old. It's game commons concept. And this was the other whole project thing, where we tried to design kind of a performative experience of an alternative future in Ljubljana, and kind of enacted it as a public, say, contemporary theater piece. The interesting thing was like it was a team of 10 that together we designed this thing, and we didn't know each other beforehand. And it led to some reflections on my own practice that I then employ also in other projects. This is a kind of series of speculative objects from possible futures where if each of them tackles, let's say, utopian theme, but then kind of subverts it by saying how these things can be co-opted by the status quo. We need to try harder and such. Various smart cards for various models of basic income or fictional applications for basic income or a invitation from a multi-species union organization. And there's a whole project I'm developing around this and how these objects can be used in kind of real world situations as micro interventions or practices of guerrilla economic futuring, which could kind of first act in this kind of distributed manner, but then scale up to like LARP flash mobs and things like that. So yeah, this is the last idea, and kind of closing with this. It's just like with the game and how I was presenting that, how can we mutualize or co-create radical games together, or how games can be vehicles or engines for interesting ideas. Equally, this goes back to the idea of the open futures library, peer producing futures. Um, I would invite you to imagine a thing called Anticipedia, which is just like what it sounds like, kind of wiki for anticipation. So not just various multimedia images of possible futures, the dystopian, the utopian, everything in between, but also various tools through which we can contribute, collaborate, co-curate, create local instances, share our like findings and insights that can feed into like a local practice of an iterative and reflexive cycles of producing economic science fictions capable of countering capitalist realism. And with that, I close and invite, for any questions.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm now gonna stop the recording.